In January 2025, a team of deep-sea engineers aimed the most advanced underwater scanning technology ever built at a target nearly 3 miles beneath the North Atlantic. Their systems fired millions upon millions of data points into the crushing blackness, building a picture of something no human eye could fully see. High-resolution optical imaging arrays captured details finer than a fingernail. Photogrammetric reconstruction software stitched the images together into a three-dimensional model so precise that a single rivet head could be measured from a computer screen on the surface. The company was Magellan Limited, the same team that had stunned the world by creating the first complete digital twin of the Titanic. But the Titanic was the easy one. This target was different. The Bismarck sits nearly a full kilometer deeper than the Titanic, on the steep flank of an extinct underwater volcano, in near-zero visibility, at pressures that would crush a conventional submarine like a soda can. No one had ever attempted a full-scale digital twin at this depth. When the weeks of data processing were complete and the three-dimensional model was finally assembled, the team could see things no human eye had ever seen. Individual shell impacts preserved to the millimeter. Structural deformations frozen mid-collapse. A debris field of shattered steel stretching a full kilometer down the volcanic slope. And deep within the scan, buried in the lower sections of the hull, the data revealed something that should not be there: a sealed compartment, intact, untouched. After 84 years, after nearly 3,000 shells, after a 3-mile plunge to the bottom of the ocean. And what the scan revealed about that room changes everything we thought we knew about how this ship died. But to understand why a single room inside a dead warship matters this much, you need to understand what the Bismarck was. Commissioned in August of 1940, the Bismarck was the most powerful warship on Earth. It was over 823 feet long and more than 50,000 tons fully loaded. Its main battery was 8 15-inch guns housed in 4 enormous turrets named Anton, Bruno, Caesar, and Dora. Each gun could hurl an 1,800-pound shell, the weight of a small car, more than 21 miles. It could hit targets over the horizon. The ship could make over 30 knots, and it was wrapped in a belt of armor nearly 13 inches thick, made from Wotan steel, some of the hardest military-grade metal ever produced. It was a floating fortress, and its very existence was a violation of the treaties that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of weapon from being built. In May of 1941, this monster slipped out of port on its first and only mission. Operation Rheinuebung, Rhine Exercise. The objective was devastating: break into the open Atlantic and destroy the Allied convoys that were the only thing keeping Great Britain alive. Food, fuel, weapons, everything Britain needed to survive crossed that ocean on merchant ships. If the Bismarck got loose among them, the war could be over. Winston Churchill understood this, and the entire British Admiralty understood this. On May 24th, their worst fear became real. The Bismarck was intercepted in the Denmark Strait by the pride of the Royal Navy, the battlecruiser HMS Hood and the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales. The Hood was a legend, the biggest warship in the British fleet, a symbol of naval power for 20 years. She had sailed around the globe, been printed on postcards, and featured in newsreels. Every young sailor in the Royal Navy had grown up in her shadow, but she had a fatal flaw. She was a battlecruiser, not a true battleship. She was fast, but her deck armor was dangerously thin. The battle lasted 6 minutes. At 5:55 in the morning, the Bismarck fired a salvo from over 10 miles away. An 1,800-pound shell arced across the icy sky and struck the Hood amidships. It plunged through her thin deck armor and detonated deep inside the rear ammunition magazines. What happened next was witnessed by every ship in the area. The Hood erupted in a catastrophic fireball that shot hundreds of feet into the air. The blast was so violent that the ship, all 48,000 tons of it, broke in half and sank in under 3 minutes. Of her 1,418 men, 3 survived, 3 men out of an entire ship's company. The shockwave of that loss rippled through the entire British war effort. Churchill issued one order: sink the Bismarck. Every available warship was diverted. This was no longer just a battle, it was a vendetta. But the Bismarck was wounded. A shell from the Prince of Wales had pierced a forward fuel tank. The ship was trailing a long slick of black oil across the Atlantic. Admiral Louetjens turned his ship toward occupied France, toward the dry dock at Saint-Nazaire, the only one big enough to hold this giant. And then, for 24 terrifying hours, the Bismarck vanished. It performed a wide, sweeping maneuver and disappeared into the vast Atlantic. Panic swept through the British Admiralty. They had lost the beast. A Catalina flying boat found the oil slick on May 26th, but the main fleet was still too far away. The Bismarck would reach French air cover before the battleships could intercept. Once it was under the umbrella of Luftwaffe protection, the Royal Navy would never get close enough to finish it. The only ship close enough to strike was the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, and her only weapons were Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers. These planes were relics from another era, fabric-covered biplanes with open cockpits and a top speed of 138 miles per hour. In an age of Spitfires and Messerschmitts, these things looked like they belonged in a museum. Their crews called them string bags, and these were the aircraft tasked with stopping the most advanced warship on the planet. In a howling gale, the string bags launched from Ark Royal's pitching deck. The first wave nearly caused a catastrophe, accidentally targeting their own cruiser, HMS Sheffield, in the terrible visibility. Thankfully, the torpedoes malfunctioned and missed. The second wave found the Bismarck. Most torpedoes missed or struck the thick armor belt and did nothing. But one torpedo hit the stern and jammed both rudders hard to port. The Bismarck was now stuck turning in a helpless circle, drifting straight toward the approaching British fleet. Engineers tried desperately to free the rudders. Divers went into the freezing Atlantic to try to blast them loose with explosives. Nothing worked. Admiral Louetjens sent a final message: "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell." On the morning of May 27th, the battleships Rodney and King George V closed in for the kill. For nearly 2 hours, they pummeled the Bismarck at close range, sometimes as near as 2 miles. The superstructure was obliterated. The command towers were reduced to twisted, smoking metal. The guns fell silent one by one as their turrets were knocked out. Nearly 3,000 shells were fired at the ship. The upper decks became an inferno of burning wreckage, but the ship would not sink. Its battle flags were still flying. The cruiser Dorsetshire closed in and fired torpedoes into its sides, and still the Bismarck floated, battered beyond recognition, but stubbornly buoyant. And this is where two versions of the story have fought each other for 80 years. The British said their firepower sank it. The German survivors, the 110 men pulled from the freezing water, told a different story. They said First Officer Hans Oels gave the order to scuttle. Open the watertight doors, set the demolition charges. Chief Engineering Officer Gerhard Junak planted charges in the engine rooms with 9-minute fuses. The intercom was destroyed, so he sent a messenger running through the burning corridors to confirm the order. At 10:20, the charges went off. Junak heard them detonate as he climbed through the dying ship. Elsewhere in the hull, men opened seacocks and reversed pumps, flooding compartments that had been carefully kept dry throughout the entire battle. By 10:40, the Bismarck was gone, rolling slowly to port, capsizing and sliding beneath the waves, stern first. Over 2,000 men went into the freezing Atlantic. The cruiser Dorsetshire and the destroyer Maori moved in to rescue survivors. British sailors threw ropes over the side. A young midshipman named Joe Brooks jumped into the water himself to help wounded German sailors climb up. One German sailor, who had lost both his arms, was clinging to a rope with his teeth. Brooks tried to save him, but could not. Then a lookout on the Dorsetshire spotted what he thought was a periscope, a U-boat alarm. The rescue was abandoned immediately. The ships pulled away while hundreds of men were still in the water. Only 110 were saved out of a crew of over 2,200. For decades, the scuttling claim was dismissed as German pride. Then, in 1989, Robert Ballard found the wreck. The same man who had discovered the Titanic 4 years earlier led a team into the North Atlantic with a 12-ton robotic sled named Argo. For days, they dragged it across 150 square miles of ocean floor, staring at grainy monitors. Then, on June 8th, debris appeared on the sonar. Massive, twisted steel plates. They followed the trail, and the Bismarck emerged from the gloom, sitting upright on the volcanic slope. 823 feet of warship in one piece. The ship had slammed into the volcano and triggered a mile-long landslide, but the hull held together. The 4 main turrets, each over 1,000 tons, had fallen out as the ship capsized and now sat upside down on the seabed. The teak decking was still intact. The original paint was still visible. It looked less like a wreck and more like a ghost ship waiting for a crew. And what Ballard saw changed the conversation. His cameras swept across the Bismarck's armor belt, and his team counted only 8 shell penetrations, all above the waterline. Below the waterline, nothing. No catastrophic breaches, no torpedo holes punching through the armored citadel. 14-inch shells from King George V had literally bounced off the German armor, leaving enormous dents, but no penetrations. Ballard said it plainly. The Bismarck did not implode. The hull was whole and relatively undamaged by the descent. If the armor held, how did the ship sink so fast? But Ballard's technology could only show the outside. The answer was locked inside the wreck. Then in 2002, James Cameron took the next step. The Titanic director chartered the Russian research vessel Akademik Keldysh and its 2 MIR submersibles, the deepest diving crewed vessels in the world. His brother Mike designed 2 small remotely operated vehicles known as ROVs, nicknamed Jake and Elwood after the Blues Brothers. These robots were compact enough to swim through the flooded, corroded passageways of the dead battleship, tethered to the submersibles by fiber optic cables. For the first time in history, cameras went inside the Bismarck, and the footage was haunting. They found spring mattresses still visible in crew quarters, tables standing in the encoding room, seaplanes preserved inside the aircraft hangar, anti-aircraft guns still in their mounts. But the critical discovery was structural. The internal decks below the main armored deck had been compressed downward by 10 to 13 feet. The sheer weight of water flooding from inside had crushed the ship's internal skeleton as it plunged to the bottom. The ship had not been broken from the outside in. It had collapsed from the inside out. Cameron's conclusion was clear. The shells and torpedoes destroyed the ship's ability to fight, but the act that sent the Bismarck to the bottom was the scuttling. It was an inside job. But here is where the story enters a completely new chapter. Because everything Ballard saw and everything Cameron filmed was limited by the technology of their time. Ballard used sonar and camera sleds in 1989. Cameron used remotely operated vehicles with spotlights and video cameras in 2002. Both expeditions saw only what was directly in front of the lens, in murky water, under crushing pressure, for limited windows of time. They captured fragments. Stunning fragments, but fragments nonetheless. They could not see the whole picture. They could not measure what they saw. They could not examine the areas they could not physically reach. And there were vast sections of the interior that no remotely operated vehicle could safely navigate. Magellan's 2025 scan changed all of that in a single stroke. Magellan deployed advanced deep ocean mapping systems, high-resolution optical imaging arrays, and large-scale photogrammetric reconstruction equipment to a depth of 4,800 meters. To put that in perspective, the pressure at that depth is roughly 700 times atmospheric pressure, or about 6,800 pounds per square inch. A human being at this depth would be crushed instantly. Even purpose-built submersibles must be engineered down to the last weld. Visibility is measured in meters, not miles. The terrain is a steep volcanic slope covered in fine sediment that billows into blinding clouds at the slightest disturbance. And the Bismarck sits a full kilometer deeper than the Titanic, which already pushed the boundaries of what Magellan's team thought possible. Everything about this project required them to go further than they had ever gone before. Over the course of the survey, the team systematically captured the entire wreck, the entire debris field, and the surrounding seabed in millimeter-accurate detail. The result is a photorealistic, fully navigable 3-dimensional model. You can virtually stand on the ocean floor next to the wreck and examine a single shell casing. You can trace the path of a torpedo impact across the hull plating. You can count individual gun rounds scattered in the debris. The painted swastika on the bow, ordered to be covered before the final mission, is still legible in the scan data. Researchers can now reconstruct the Bismarck's final battle spatially and chronologically, based on direct physical evidence rather than eyewitness accounts or grainy video footage for the first time in history. The scan mapped the initial impact of the stern with the seabed, then the massive debris field scattered across the volcanic slope. Gun turrets weighing over 1,000 tons, armor sections, shell casings, structural components, the shattered remains of the Admiral's Bridge, and features that had never been documented by any previous expedition are all captured in full spatial context. The wreckage trail extends roughly 1 kilometer from the point of first contact to the Bismarck's final resting place. The detail is so precise that Magellan can measure progressive structural failure across the hull, identifying where each section buckled, where each plate bent, and in what sequence the damage occurred. But here is what no one expected. Deep within the scan data, in the lower sections of the hull beneath the main armored deck, the model revealed a compartment that was structurally intact, not crushed, not flooded in the same catastrophic way as the engine rooms and surrounding spaces. A sealed room, its walls still holding their original geometry while everything around it had been compressed, buckled, or torn apart. The structural members around the compartment had bent inward, absorbing the impact forces that destroyed adjacent sections at that depth. This is the kind of anomaly that would have been invisible to a camera. You would have had to physically measure the geometry of every bulkhead, every frame, every plate in the lower hull to find it. And that is exactly what a millimeter-accurate scan does. It measures everything. This compartment appears to have been one of the most heavily reinforced sections of the lower hull, likely associated with magazine storage or a command-level secure space. The kind of room that was engineered from the beginning to survive exactly the kind of punishment this ship received. The scan data tells an even more disturbing story. The deformation patterns around the sealed compartment suggest it was deliberately isolated before the scuttling began. The watertight doors to adjacent compartments show evidence of having been opened, consistent with the scuttling order, while this one remained shut. Someone, in the final chaotic minutes of the Bismarck's life, made a choice: flood the ship, open every door, set the charges, but seal this room. The German survivors described the scuttling as a systematic act. Open the doors, set the fuses, abandon ship. But none of them ever mentioned preserving anything. None of them mentioned a room that was deliberately sealed while everything else was opened. This detail, invisible to every previous expedition, visible only through millimeter resolution scanning, suggests that in the Bismarck's final minutes, someone on that ship wanted something to survive the sinking. The German government has declared the Bismarck a protected war grave. Interior exploration requires their consent, and they have categorically denied it. Whatever is inside that sealed compartment may remain there forever, locked behind nearly 5,000 meters of freezing ocean and the authority of international law. But the scan tells us it is there. It tells us it was intentional. And it tells us that the story of the Bismarck's final moments, the orderly scuttling, the desperate crew, the ship disappearing beneath the waves, has one more chapter that no one has read. A chapter that was invisible until a team of engineers built a millimeter-accurate digital copy of a dead warship and examined it pixel by pixel. 84 years, multiple expeditions, Robert Ballard with his sonar sleds, James Cameron with his deep-sea robots, and it took a three-dimensional scan, the most advanced ever attempted at abyssal depth, to find a room that someone on that doomed ship went out of their way to protect while the world was exploding around them. The Bismarck has always been a ship of impossible stories. A 1-in-a-million shot that sank the hood, a 1-in-a-million torpedo that jammed its rudders, an armor belt that shrugged off 3,000 shells, a wreck so well preserved that you can still see its original paint after 8 decades on the ocean floor. And now, a sealed room that survived everything the ocean could throw at it. The question is no longer who sank the Bismarck. The question is, what were they trying to save? Was it codebooks that could never fall into British hands? Was it a record of the ship's final hours? Or was it something else entirely, something that 84 years of darkness and 5,000 meters of ocean have kept perfectly hidden? Technology got us this far. Maybe one day it will get us the rest of the way. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that history tried to bury. And let us know in the comments, what do you think is inside that sealed room?